Hello and welcome to IGPP Expert Talks AI Special Series. I'm your host Manish, and today we are here to discuss one of the most urgent issues in our digital ecosystem, the newly released Standard Operating Procedures by MIPI for the removal of non-consensual intimate imagery. Until now, India had no clear system to deal with it. Victims had to run from platform to platform, police station to helplines, retelling their trauma each time. The framework outlines multiple routes for victims to file complaints, including through intermediaries, one-stop centers, law enforcement agencies, and the National Cybercrime Reporting Portal. It also requires online platforms to remove reported content within 24 hours of receiving a complaint. Additional SOP sets out clear coordination mechanisms between intermediaries, the Ministry of Home Affairs, and the Department of Telecommunications to ensure swift takedowns and prevent re-uploads. To explore the implications of this SOP, we are pleased to have today with us Ms. Karuna Nain. Welcome, Karuna. Ms. Karuna Nain is the former Director, Global Safety Policy Meta, co-founder StopNCII.org. Karuna is a global online safety expert with 2 decades experience in technology policy, safety strategy, government affairs, and communications. She advises technology companies, nonprofits, and governments on building safer digital ecosystem through practical policy, product design, and stakeholder engagement. Karuna spent a decade at Meta and served as Global Safety Policy Director, leading work on child safety and well-being, women's safety and suicide prevention. She co-founded StopNCII with UK charity SWGFL and serves on its board of trustees. Once again, welcome to the show, Karuna. I would straight away delve into the questions. Before we talk in detail about the new NCII SOPs, could you set up the context? Why these SOPs needed and what are the gaps which exist in the present system?
Thank you, Manish. And before I dive into your question, I want to just take a moment to thank you for having me on your incredible talk show. But also, it's lovely to see you again. For those of you who are listening in who don't know, Manish and I go actually a long way to when we were both students at JNU. So it is lovely to be here and to be in conversation with Manish about this issue that is very close to my heart, but also the work that your organization does. So, Manish, again,
thank you so much.
So, Manish, this is such a welcome step by the government, this standard operating procedure. The intent behind it is something which, I have to commend because I have worked with people who have experienced non-consensual intimate image abuse. And it is such a traumatic event in someone's life to have their intimate images shared online without their consent, or even the threats to share these images can be such it can break your hope and your trust. So any measure which governments introduce to try and help victims navigate these very difficult situations is always welcome. So the genesis of these standard operating procedures is one such victim, survivor, who approached the High Court and shared their experience as to what their experience was when their intimate images were shared online without their consent. And what really stood out was the fact that, that it's not just something which you just deal with and you can move on with your life. It's something which stays with you for a really long time because, you can get one image taken down, it pops up somewhere else and it pops up somewhere else. So the victims and the survivors have to be constantly on guard to check where this content is being shared, and the burden is on them to report it and get it taken down. And so the Chennai High Court then directed the Ministry for IT to come up with these standard operating procedures, which would not just help victims, but also guide tech platforms and the government as to what the response should be like when someone encounters this horrific abuse. So it is the intent behind these SOPs is, again, very, very welcome because this is such a horrific harm. So anything that can help victims get some kind of structure on how should they respond when this happens to them or when they're being threatened, and what should tech companies, what's the expectation out of them, what are the different government departments that kick into play when something like this happens. It's a very strong intent, or the goal behind this document is something that I really appreciate.
I think you have rightly and I would say very precisely put in the context here. And because you have talked about perpetrators in a way, I just want to come to that first and then we come to the SOPs later. Like, in what ways do perpetrators manage to bypass existing guardrails when posting such content? Because the platforms and everything is not without guardrails or limitations, but still they bypass. And what loopholes or systemic gaps exist in tech ecosystem that needs to be addressed?
Manish, really important question. I think there are two pieces of this puzzle. There are probably more, but two that I want to, focus in on. One is the biggest thing that perpetrators, really exploit is the shame and the trauma that accompanies this harm. They know that survivors are not going to find it easy to seek help, to support, to reach out to their loved ones, to tell them what's happening to them, just because of the shame and the stigma attached with this form of harm. The usual reaction of somebody you share your experience with is, why did you share your photos? So that shame, that blame that happens with the victims stops them from reaching out and getting help and support. And that's the first thing that perpetrators capitalize on. They want to make sure they know that the victim is not going to reach out, get help and support. And that's what they hone in on. I think the second piece of it, which you rightly talked about, is the tech aspects of it. These are very egregious bad actors, and some of them are very smart, and they know how these tech platforms operate. They know where those lines of those policies are, and they'll try and just walk up to that line and not try and fully violate the policy, but enough to intimidate or harm the survivor, but not enough context for the platform to be able to actually take action to take down that piece of content. So they really are, some of them are very, very smart. They also understand how the tech piece of it works. A lot of these technology platforms use something which is called image matching or hash matching, where once they recognize that this is a violating piece of content, they can actually stop it from being reshared on their platforms by using a digital fingerprint or a hash, which indicates that this is a violating piece of content. And these perpetrators know that if you make major alterations to that photo or that video, it will bypass the platform's detection systems and they will be able to upload it or share it. So they are technically, some of them are quite smart, and then are very egregious, and they know how to game the tech systems or the tech safeguards that platforms put in place. The third thing they also know is that some of these one-on-one messaging apps, are not, they are encrypted. So tech platforms can't proactively get ahead of some of this harmful content over there. And so they'll try and use those one-on-one messaging apps or platforms to get ahead of or to harm the victim. The other thing which they do is they know that tech platforms aren't really talking to each other in this space. So they will hop platforms. So they will, share it on one platform. Then if suppose it is detected, the content is reported, or the platform proactively detects it and takes it down and takes down their account, they will move to the other platform and move to the other platform. So they also know that, the tech ecosystem right now, unlike in child abuse content where, hashes are shared across platforms, they are not being shared across platforms for adult NCII. So they try and get ahead or try and scale up their abuse by hopping tech platforms to harass or intimidate the victim. So they do it both at the psychological level, but also at the tech and the platform level, where they have an understanding, some of them, not all, of what is going on.
I think because that social psychological issue definitely at helm of it, because the kind of society we live in and the family system and values and everything, it comes handy, but it also is one of the major, I would say, the limitation for all of us to report such incidences. Anyway, could you walk us through what the SOP, the new SOP, actually lays out, what it means in practice, and how it changes the experience for victims?
Yeah, and I think you summarized it pretty accurately right at the start of this, webinar that you and I are doing, that the SOP essentially lays out 2-3 very key vital pieces of information. The first is it really tells victims what they should do, or it seeks to tell victims what they should do if they are in this predicament, if an intimate image of theirs is shared. It talks to them about what are the reporting options available to them. They can report directly on the platforms. They can report via the National Crime Reporting portal. They can report via the one-stop centers. They can go to law enforcement or to lawyers to get help and support. So it tells them, what can you do if you find yourself in this situation? Second, it tells platforms what are the expectations out of them. It talks to them about, how they should act speedily in these cases and try and take down the content within 24 hours. It talks about platforms are expected to use things like hash matching and image matching technologies to try and reduce the burden from victims to keep on reporting this content once the platform is aware of it. So that's the second piece of the puzzle. The third piece of the thing, which for me was super interesting, was to see how the government is thinking about coordination between its various arms, things like the Sahyog portal, a clearinghouse, what it sounds like to me. And again, I'm not a legal person, and this is just my understanding of it based on what I saw. And that's what the most critical piece, in which I'd love to learn more about in the days to come. How is this portal going to work? How are they going to share the hashes back with participating or with platforms? Because just getting the hashes is step one, but to really stop this abuse from happening, you have to have a system whereby you're sharing these hashes with tech companies to make sure that they are keeping an eye out for this content and stopping it from being shared. And, this crime, as we all know, is unfortunately global. It's not that the content will just, the perpetrator and the victim are based in one country, or it's going to be shared by people who are just in one country. So having that global coordination plan in place, leveraging systems like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's Take It Down, or StopNCII.org, so that, it speaks to global systems which have been created in this space. That's what I'm very curious to learn more about. The other thing that really stood out for me was some expectations which the SOP lays out for tech companies, which I want to see how tech companies can actually enforce on those. So one of them that stood out for me was informing victims every time someone shares their intimate image, or I wasn't clear whether it was informing victims or informing the government, but in either case, how is that technically feasible is the first question. And then second, what's in the best interest of victims? Because unlike children, adults have agency, and adults need to have, some element of control in these horrific situations where they can get to decide what action do they want to take, and whether they want to be informed that someone's sharing their intimate image or not, or have they moved on from that stage. They just want it taken down, but they don't want to wake up every morning with an alert saying someone saw your intimate image or shared your intimate image. It just re-traumatizes them every time, you get that kind of a notification. So I have a lot of questions about the SOP as well, which I'm hoping that, we'll get clarity on in the days to come.
I think that is an important point which you have raised about the legality of the issue, and I would say the feasibility technically. And what is more important along with this is, at the personal, psychological, and social level, do you want to be reminded of it every time or not? Or is it just the responsibility of the state, to which all of us are part of, and fortunately, unfortunately, that has become global, and the issues of propriety and everything else would come into play. So it's definitely a difficult aspect. So since the current SOPs largely address harm after crime has occurred, do you think India should consider a take it down act style approach, or one that tackles the root cause by ensuring stronger preventive measures rather than only supporting victims once the damage is done?
I think you've touched on something very key, and which is why I worked on StopNCII.org. So to answer your question first, I think both. I think you have to have, a way for victims to get justice, to be able to get control, when they're in this very traumatic experience. So it is important to have those redressal mechanisms and to have laws in place that clearly declare that this harm is illegal. What is the expectation on platforms when this content is uploaded on their services, but also what, other measures that a victim can put into place when they are in these situations. But I think you've really touched on something which is very key, and something which we heard in my previous life when I was working in the tech industry from victims all the time, that, tech has evolved, tech has moved on. There are some technologies which are available that can help us even prevent this harm. So why do we need to wait for this content to be shared online before we can try and stop this abuse in its tracks? And that was the genesis of StopNCII.org. You can always go to a platform and report it if the content is shared on it. But can we take a step back? Can we help victims, one, prevent this harm before it happens? So in the case of StopNCII.org, victims can actually go and share a digital fingerprint or a hash of their photo or video. That photo or video is then shared with participating companies. So when the victim goes to stopncii.org, they don't actually share the photo and the video. So it's very privacy preserving. All they share is that hash. That hash is then shared with participating platforms. And right now there are over 15, I think they're close to 17 participating platforms that ingest these hashes. And if someone tries to upload content that matches that hash, content teams across these platforms review the content to determine whether it violates their policies or not. And if they find that it violates their policy, they take it down, and they also sometimes take action against the uploading account if, they're depending on what their policies are. So what it really tries to do is that I was in a relationship. I had a messy breakup. We had taken intimate images because that moment we were in a trusting place. We moved on from there. I have broken up with that person. I have those photos and videos. I should be able to stop this abuse in its tracks before that person uploads them somewhere. I should be able to give a signal to companies to say, this content, please don't allow it. It's being shared without my consent. So I think it's critical to move to that prevention, to stop abuse and harm before it happens, and start thinking in that direction, because once the harm or once the content has been uploaded, it's too late. It's a very messy and, a horrible experience for somebody to go through. So if we can stop it, we should.
It paints a very grim picture, to be honest. But it like there are chances, like, it might be grimmer in terms of the way AI is amplifying in its scale and the speed of NCII. Do you think the earlier proposed rules on synthetically generated content are adequate to address this challenge?
So one of the things I've learned from working in this space is, when I've talked to people who have experienced both NCII and AI generated content being shared without their consent, is that the trauma which they experience is very similar. It doesn't matter if it was a photo or a video of mine, if it was shared, or if someone created a photo or video of mine with the explicit intent of shaming me and harassing me and intimidating me. So the laws which are introduced should be proportionate. They should recognize the harm regardless of whether it is synthetically generated or whether it is an image or video of yours which is shared without your consent. So the question remains, whether laws, and Carnegie Endowment Institute has done this incredible paper where they've tried to analyze existing AI regulations, in existing laws, and whether they will step up, or the country needs to come up with a whole batch of new laws to respond to AI-generated harms. So if people haven't read it, I highly recommend, because I didn't know much about the Indian legal system when I came back to India. So this was a good, learning resource for me. And what really stood out to me, that India does have a existing patchwork of laws which courts are using. They're stretching, to try and respond to the cases. A few cases that have come in front of the courts, which are mostly of public figures till now, they've been able to lean heavily on the existing legal framework to respond to those. Now, whether in time with this the scale, the speed of this harm increasing in frequency just because of how these AI products are getting more into hands of common people and they're getting more usable and getting more, that's something which time will only tell. The thing I will say is that we need to remember that it is a very, very bad experience for someone to go through. And unfortunately, even if laws are in place, how many victims would actually go and report this if this happens to them? We need to, in addition to ensuring that we have the right legal infrastructure in place, make sure that these laws are actually accessible to common people, that people are comfortable going up to law enforcement to report these harms when it happens to them, that they are not shamed, they are not re-victimized, and there needs a lot of investment in training into the entire ecosystem to make these laws actually accessible to victims. So I think that's where the focus also needs to be, in addition to making sure that the laws are adequate.
I think that's definitely a very important aspect, and it's a humongous task because the kind of scale we are seeing, and in terms of diversity we have as a country in language, in social systems, and in society, all those things. If I'm just talking about India, it would definitely be difficult and a bigger task. But what you just spoke about, like, the laws which are there, and they had been largely talking about celebrities and people of some significance. In our report, IGPP, the report we did on elections and AI last year, like, because the last year was the year when there were so many elections around. We observed that even prominent female politicians were targeted with manipulated content that is spread widely. And it's like not somebody very unknown, but people who are like, well known PMs and president kind of people even. In your view, what responsibility do platforms have to curb this growing menace? Do you think platforms are doing enough or they could even do?
So, Manish, I think, you brought up something which I've been following a lot as well in the course of my work, how NCII is used to silence women in public life, be it
Yes.
journalists, be it, people who are standing in for public office, how it is used as a tool to really ensure that women have to take a step back, because the impact of NCII on men and on women, it's a very gendered impact. It can
Definitely.
silence women a lot more. And I think, we've seen cases of this crop up world over, how it has been used as a weapon in some senses. So the question is, what can platforms do to ensure that it does not become weaponized, and that women are able to, enjoy the benefits of the internet, to make access the people who they represent, to have important dialogues, conversations. I do think that, the table stakes are making sure that platforms have policies that recognize this harm, that make it very clear to users, that perpetrators, that if they do engage in this kind of behavior, they will be taken off the platform. The second piece of it is education. Unfortunately, a lot of this content that is shared, especially around celebrities and public figures, for some reason, people have a different threshold of acceptance when it comes to public figures and celebrities. They feel that they must have agreed for their content to be public because they are in, especially entertainment, Bollywood figures. So therefore, they don't think that this is illegal content or harmful content, and they share it thinking, she's an actress, she's put herself out there, she's done this to get more eyeballs. So they don't see the harm, and they forget that there's a person behind those photos and videos. So education is also something which platforms need to play a really significant role on. The third piece of it is making reporting easy and making it more accessible to people, because as you said, India is a country of many, many languages. How easy have you made it reporting? Or, because you're already under so much trauma, when you go through the process, do you get discouraged to report? And the good news is a lot of platforms are putting resources and thinking about some of these things. The next piece of it is using things like AI, machine learning, technology to reduce some of the burdens from victims. So when I was at Facebook, for example, one of the things that engineers worked on was, could we proactively detect NCII even before it was reported to us, just by the nature of the photo or the video that was shared, plus the comments that were accompanying that photo or the video, or the post that was made by the user, may give you enough signal that this is not a consensually shared intimate image. Because a lot of these platforms will not allow nudity, but will allow, content which is more risque, which is more suggestive, which is more intimate. So that, how does a platform decide whether this is NCII or not, is something which some tech companies really butt up against. And so they had worked to the point where they had been able to deploy AI to proactively detect and determine if this is NCII or not, and take action. And then, of course, resources, because this is such an isolating journey. Sometimes you don't feel equipped to reach out to people who are near you for help and support. Could the platform help you connect to a specialist helpline in your part of the world that works on these issues? So for in India, for example, Rati is a really great organization that's on the ground working on these issues. Could the victim be connected to Rati? Because this content is probably not just being shared on your platform, it's being shared wider, and it's part of a bigger abuse pattern which is playing out. And this NGO might help the victim navigate through that. One of the things we've learned about this is, yes, there is like the unknown people or the perpetrators with bad intent, but also a significant portion of NCII is sometimes by known individuals, people who you've been in a relationship with, or somewhere. So making sure that there are resources to help people navigate these situations is also critical. And then your other question is, are tech companies doing enough? So it's a mixed bag. A lot of the bigger players, there's a lot of focus on them, there's a lot of attention on them. They're stepping up, they are doing innovating, they're trying to look at getting ahead of this harm. But I think a lot of the smaller companies, and as you mentioned in my introduction, I serve as a trustee for Southwest Grid for Learning that hosts StopNCII.org. They also run a helpline called UK Revenge Porn Helpline, which is one of the most amazing helplines that works in this space. And the one thing that I hear constantly from them is that a lot of this bad content lives on websites where there is absolutely no holding those websites accountable, let alone sending them a takedown notice, let alone getting the content taken off. So is there, a way that we can bring those dark or, really terrible websites to hold them accountable and get some recourse for victims? That's the other question that we need to ask ourselves.
So before I come to my final question, I want to know a little more about NCII. What exactly you do? NCII is kind of offering to all of us.
The StopNCI.org portal you're talking
Yeah,
about?
yeah. Stop NCII. Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's a website which anyone anywhere around the world can go to get help and support if they are worried that they have photos and videos of which are intimate, which someone is either threatening them or they're just concerned that they could be used without their consent. So it's important
Hmm.
you have the photos and videos. A lot of the time, unfortunately, survivors will come to me and say, I don't have the photo or the video. Then this service is not the best service to help you out. You should get help. You should go to a helpline and try and get some guidance on what you can do in your case. But if you have the photos or videos, this is the correct place for you to be. You can go to this website. They'll make you answer a few quick questions. They don't record any of your private information, no private data. What they're trying to just determine is this service the correct service to help you out? So they're trying to
Hmm.
understand what's happening in the photos and videos. Is this photo of you or of someone else? Because they don't want you reporting on behalf of someone else. We've had cases in South Asia where families are very paternalistic and very protectionist, and they may want to,
Hmm.
like silence content about their daughters and, being put in the
True.
public domain because they don't agree with the content. So this is trying to stop that kind of harm also. So it asks some questions to make sure this is the correct platform for you. If you qualify with those questions, then you can go ahead and you can submit a hash. Again, the platform will not take your photo or video. It'll just take a digital fingerprint of your photo or video. It'll use that hash. It'll send it across to the 17 plus participating platforms, who will then
Hmm.
proactively keep an eye if someone shares your violating content, or if it already exists on their platforms. They will then send it to a content moderator or reviewer who will check if this violates their policies, and then they will take action on that content if it violates their policies. Victims can go back to stopncii.org and check the status of their reports, so they can check whether any platform did detect their intimate image was shared and how many instances they were able to stop of it being shared. So they do get that feedback from the platform as well. But no information is shared with stopNCI.org. You get a unique case number, which you need to be able to access your dashboard to see
Hmm.
what's happened once you've submitted your report. But stopNCI.org does not take any information of yours other than that email to send you that unique case number. So yeah.
Good. So finally, what additional measures should each stakeholder, such as government, platforms, research and academia, civil society, and users, take to build a more robust and safe ecosystem for users?
So I think we've covered a lot of it through our conversation, but just at a super high
Yeah.
level, I think first we need to, as a society, really understand where the blame lies for this kind of harm. It's not on the
Hmm.
victim for opening up and being being in a trusted relationship where they've shared this content. It's on the perpetrator who's violated the trust. So don't
Hmm.
the victim, blame the person who's actually shared the content. Put the blame where the blame should lie. That's number
Hmm.
one. So as a society, we should be more open to having victims come out, seek help, get help, and not feel like this is something which they cannot rise above and get ahead of. So that's, I
Sure.
think, fundamental. In
Hmm.
terms of the government, I think the government plays a really important role, and it's so, again, which is why I felt like the intent behind the SOPs and the government releasing them is really strong message that this is a violation of a person's personal images, and this does require everybody to step up to support victims who are going through this horrific experience. The government also has been putting a lot of guardrails and a lot of processes in place for industry to respond. But I do think, the dark websites which you and I talked about, which are
Hmm.
currently not, within the government's
Purview.
purview in some senses. I mean, everybody's, you're operating in India, you're within the government's purview, but they're not accessible right now by victims to
True.
get their content taken down. They should also focus on how do you get victims help and support in those black spots of the internet. The third piece of it is the intermediaries or the companies. We've talked about this, right from having policies in place to having reporting systems to using tech to get ahead of this harm to having support resources. They need to think about this as a 360-degree approach and make sure they're working with victim advocates to really hear how this harm is manifesting, how it's changing shape, to respond and to make sure that victims feel supported if they go through this harm piece of it. So I think that in a nutshell. Then I think the other piece of it, which we haven't talked about, And I was at an event last week where there was this really incredible group of social workers, people who are working with survivors and victims on the front lines, helping them navigate these spaces, making sure they are sourced and they exist. Because again, it's so intimidating for victims to go and register a case, FIR, darj karna, you know how complicated it can
I
be.
know, yeah.
So making sure that victims can actually get help and support and giving them the agency. Let's not take the agency away from victims. Let's give them, they are adults. They know best about what's going on in their situation and they can decide what they want to do in these situations. So making sure victims still have agency is also very, very critical.
Good. I must say that, the new SOPs which we are talking about gives more hope because, all of us in some form or other have these concerns and might have faced those things. So I wish that, these things would work better in the coming future. And for the Stop NCI, I sincerely feel like, the way you are trying to help people, that should reach as more people as possible. And that is it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving time for IGPP Expert Talks.
Thank you for having me, Manish.
Thank you.